It was a cold October evening, and rain was softly falling over the narrow streets of the mountain town. Eva and her friends, Luca and Andre, received an unexpected invitation to a Halloween party in an abandoned building at the edge of town. The building was ancient, and rumors suggested it was once an isolated sanatorium where patients would mysteriously vanish. Intrigued, they decided to go, feeling it would be the perfect adventure for Halloween night. Arriving at the building, they were greeted by an oppressive silence. Several candles burned on the stone steps, casting shadows over pumpkins carved with faces that stretched eerily along the cracked walls. A message in what looked like blood greeted them on the door: "Welcome, guests of blood." Trying to mask his fear with humor, Luca opened the door and stepped inside first. The others followed, their breaths quickening and expressions frozen as they moved further into the darkness. The walls inside were covered in strange images and sketches, shadows, silhouettes, and ominous figures that seemed to peer into their world from another plane. The atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick and stale, as though no one had breathed there for years. Suddenly, Eva felt a cold hand on her shoulder. Turning, she saw no one, but a faint whisper reached her ear: "They're here, waiting for you." As they went further, the strange sounds intensified. Rustling, creaking, indistinct whispers, all blended together, growing into a haunting chorus. Suddenly, a faint light flickered in a corner of the hallway, revealing a large, empty room. The walls were lined with old photographs, each depicting distorted faces and shadows lurking behind the subjects. Eva recognized one of the photographs. It was her grandparents' house, an old, derelict building that had burned down a few years earlier. But what terrified her most was seeing a dark figure in that picture, a shadow standing behind the upstairs window, right where she used to sleep. "This can't be," Eva whispered. "Someone was there, all along." Luca and Andre stared at the photograph in equal horror, realizing that the room was more than a relic of the past. It was a window into something darker. Unbeknownst to them, the three had stepped into a place where time lost meaning, and shadows of the past clung to them like relentless specters. After leaving the photo room, they discovered a slightly open door that led into a small, obscure room. The room seemed to draw them in, even though every instinct screamed to run. On the floor, in a puddle of murky water, lay a broken clock. Time was frozen at midnight, and the hands moved erratically, as if trapped between two realities. On one wall, a message was scrawled: "Time dies here, and with it, those who enter." When Andre touched the clock, a flood of images assaulted his mind. Grim visions, where he was trapped in an identical room, dark and cold, with a ceiling dripping with a dark, viscous substance. In the reflection of the mirror beside him, he saw a distorted version of himself, a shadow that whispered in a cracked, grave voice, "You are next." Luca and Eva began pulling Andre back, but he seemed transfixed, struggling to remain in the room. They finally managed to drag him out, but as they left, a terrifying voice echoed, "Your time is coming." As they moved further into the building, the three reached a wide room lined with mirrors and grotesque masks, each appearing to mimic human suffering. One mask seemed to follow Eva's gaze, as though alive. Its expression was one of agony, but with a hint of cruelty in its eyes. Eva stepped closer, feeling an odd force pulling her in. Suddenly, the mask detached from the wall and latched onto her face. It seemed to burn, and Eva screamed, struggling to tear it off. Luca finally managed to remove the mask, but traces of blood remained on her skin. Still in shock, Eva sensed an eerie presence. In the surrounding mirrors, shadowy figures watched her. Their eyes were hollow, and their mouths twisted into mocking sneers. Each step they took brought them closer to these shadows, trapped in this grotesque game of reflections. Running, the three stumbled into a circular room, where the floor was etched with strange symbols. In the center stood a makeshift altar covered in a red cloth, atop which lay a skull darkened by time and marked with mysterious signs. A deep, raspy voice sounded from the darkness, "You have been chosen. The ritual must be completed, and the shadows will feed on you." Around them, hazy figures began to materialize, silhouettes becoming clearer as they drifted toward the altar. Luca tried to make a sound but couldn't speak. His lips were sealed shut, and his eyes burned, while Eva felt a coldness running through her veins, paralyzing her. They were trapped in a ritual of silence, a vow they had no way of breaking. As the shadows closed in on the altar, Eva heard whispers in her mind, silence, silence, silence. The whispers grew louder, and the world around her began to spin. With his last strength, Andrei tried to break the circle and struck one of the mirrors in the room. At that moment, a deafening noise reverberated as the mirror shattered into a rain of shards scattering in every direction. The entire room began to tremble, and the shadows began to scream, melting into the air. In one final effort, the three ran for the building's exit as the shadows pursued them, screaming in rage. Time seemed to freeze, and the building disintegrated around them, each step echoed by the souls who had never escaped. Once outside, the building collapsed behind them, and the shadows dissolved into thin air. Time seemed to return to normal, and the three stood still, terrified and shaken by what they had just experienced. When they returned home, they swore never to speak of that night again. But sometimes, in the silence of night, the whispers still haunted them. They knew the shadows hadn't completely disappeared. They were waiting, patiently, for the call of blood.